Hare Krishna, everyone, and welcome to the first class of our Sri Isopanisad segment. We're going to explore the Sri Isopanisad. We're aiming for 13 classes for this. There are 18 verses and an invocation and an introduction. And we'll start as we always do with some kirtan. Hare Krishna.
That's our cue. Haribol.
Away. Did you put on musician?
Yes, I think I did. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Haribol, sweet souls. It's so good to be back together. 1 week off. It was like a lifetime, isn't it?
Yeah.
So come into a comfortable seat. And just shift around, move around, rock out your neck, your head. Open your mouth, release your jaw. Let's take a clearing breath together. Inhale, filling up. Open your mouth, exhale, let it go. And we start with our opening prayers. Deep breath in. Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunatanyaya Asmai Shri Gurave Namah Vanchakalpataruyascha Kripa Sindhu Bharevacha Patanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Bhagavan ki, Harinam Sankirtan ki, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki, Isopanisad Study Group ki, Vermont Bhakti House Sangha and beyond ki. Hari Hari Bol.
Jai.
Jai.
Om Jnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. What a pleasure. We're starting a new book. Jai. So this is the Sri Isopanisad, and it's one of the core texts that Srila Prabhupada translated in the formal study of the Bhakti Shastra called the Bhakti Shastri. They study 4 books: Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Instruction, the Sri Isopanishad, and Nectar of Devotion. At least the first 2/3 of Nectar of Devotion. And we've actually just gone through the Bhagavad Gita and Nectar of Instruction, just finished the Nectar of Instruction 2 weeks ago. Many of you were with us for that. And it's great to be with all of you, by the way. Last week was separation for me. I was experiencing separation from the Sangha of exuberant, enthusiastic attendees. So now we're back in it with Isopanishad. So the Upanishads. Prabhupada begins the introduction of the Isopanishad by talking about the word Veda. Veda means knowledge. It means knowledge, and the Vedas are the collection of all the knowledge. So it's described that there are many divisions of the Vedas. Originally, the Vedas were divided into 4. The Rig, the Sama, Atharva, and Yajurveda. You don't have to memorize those. If you want to refer to them, they're listed in the introduction. And subdivisions of them were various. There's different sections of them. One of the major sections was the Upanishads. Upanishad literally means, it's from the word Upanishad means to approach, to come closer to sit near. Upanishad means that which brings us closer to spiritual truth, right? So it's really getting into the more directly spiritual aspects. And traditionally, the Upanishads were studied by Brahmanas, persons who had undergone initiation and lived a very simple and disciplined life from birth, really, at least especially from the age of 5. And they'd been trained to control their senses and live in the mode of goodness. And in that culture of the mode of goodness, they were very much qualified, studying with other Brahmanas, to approach the Upanishads under the guidance of their spiritual teacher, living in an ashram. And by and large, this is not an option for us these days. However, just like we approach the Mahamantra, which is the highest of all mantras, just on the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, we're also approaching the Upanishads on the mercy of his devotees. Specifically the Isopanishad. There are several Upanishads. There are considered to be 10 major ones. This is one of them. Generally for devotees, those in the Bhakti line, the Upanishads are not considered as important because they're more indirect knowledge. They're generally not as direct as the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita being directly what Krishna spoke, and Srimad Bhagavatam being the discussions by his very intimate devotees about him. So the words of God and the words about God. The Upanishads are more indirect, and they contain a lot of analogies, and they're more indirect. So generally the devotees have not considered them as important. One of the reasons that Srila Prabhupada translated the Isopanishad for us is to show us that even the Upanishads are actually talking about Krishna. And you'll see that as we study this book, that for all that there is a lot of indirect pointing toward the spiritual and helping us to discern that from the material, it's also indicating the supreme person, that there is a source is actually a person, and that we're also persons too, and we're meant for connection, for relationship. And it's also useful because there are some aspects of some followers of the Vedas, some followers of Sanatana Dharma, Indian spiritual traditions, who have alternative interpretations, usually impersonal interpretations, and they'll lean very heavily on the Upanishads to support that. Of course, they have to pick and choose because the Upanishads have statements that are both personal and impersonal. They'll just selectively pick the impersonal ones. So one of Prabhupada's purposes in translating and providing the Isopanisad for us, commenting on it, is to demonstrate that those interpretations are not correct. They're not complete. You cannot take part of the message of the Upanishads out of its entire context. It's not actually considered to be respectful to the Shastra. So those who try to interpret the spiritual source as being impersonal, one of Prabhupada's goals is to demonstrate from the Upanishads themselves that that's not correct. The source is personal. Does that make sense? And we have a question.
Haribol,
Hare
I
Krishna.
was hoping to make the request, because I think our Sangha, it would be beneficial for them to hear it, to explain the difference between Advaita Vedanta and Bhakti Vedanta, because that's what you're alluding to, but maybe just use those
Sure.
terms and loosely just, simply describe that.
Sure. So Veda means knowledge, and Srila Vyasadeva, who compiled the Vedas, he wrote what's called the Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta means the conclusion of knowledge. Veda Anta. Anta means like end. Anta end. It even sounds the same. The conclusions. And the Vedanta sutras mean very, very small little aphorisms. So for example, the first sutra is Atato Brahma Jignasa, which is like 3 words. And 3 Sanskrit words. You translate to more like maybe 10. Therefore now is the time to inquire, like 7 English words. So they're very short. As such, they're like extremely condensed, little zip files. And the Vedanta being the way it is, it summarizes the Vedas. And there are different, what's called commentaries on the Vedanta. So generally the commentaries on the Vedanta fall into two different categories, Advaitin and Bhakti. Advaitin means those interpretations of the Vedanta, and therefore those interpretations of the Vedas, that conclude that there is no difference between ourselves and the Supreme Source. There's no difference between the world and the Supreme Source. Everything is exactly the same, and they don't recognize categories of reality. The Bhakti tradition actually recognizes, and we have our own commentaries on the Vedanta. In fact, we consider that Vyasadev's presenting the Srimad Bhagavatam was his own commentary on his own Vedanta Sutra. So it's a natural commentary. The Srimad Bhagavatam is actually the supreme commentary on the Vedanta. And the Bhakti perspective is that the Upanishads present some statements of non-difference. For example, you'll see in this Isopanisad, there are some statements about how, for example, the Invocation is saying, so we'll get to, that everything is emanating from the Supreme Whole and is also part of that Supreme Whole. So there's this aspect of non-difference, and there are also other aspects. There are other verses, areas of the Upanishads and other Shastra and the Vedanta that point to the difference. For example, in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, it is said, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam Eko Bahunam Yo Vidithati Kaman, which means that the Supreme is the Supreme One among all ones, the Supreme Eternal among all eternals, the one who is maintaining all others and giving them everything that they need. This is rough translation I'm giving on the fly, but it's very clear. Nityo Nityanam, the eternal of all eternals. Yo Vidithati Kaman, that is supplying everything. So there's the supplier and the supplied. So that's there. So the Bhakti transcriptions, the Bhakti commentaries on the Vedanta are more holistic. They don't abandon one aspect of the philosophy. This is why in our philosophy, we understand that what's called the Chintya Bheda Abheda, that everything is simultaneously one with and separate from the Supreme. And that's really fleshed out in Prabhupada's purports that, for example, just like a spark of fire is one with the fire because it's not something other than fire. It belongs to the fire. It's part of the illuminating, heating potency of the fire, and that's not the totality of the fire itself. And if it tries to live independently of the fire, it just dwindles away. So similarly, we have a dependent existence on the Supreme. We're part of that Supreme, but we cannot exist on our own. We cannot go and be our own fire. That doesn't work. So that's an analogy given. So that's the context philosophically. And the Isopanisad is a little more philosophical. We did Bhagavad Gita, which is a good amount of philosophy and application. And then we went to Nectar of Instruction, which is really a lot of application, really practical stuff, what to do with the knowledge. And Isopanisad is again back to kind of like starting principles of how do we know what we know? What are the basics of spiritual life? What is actually spirit? What is matter? What is the Supreme? And what does that mean for us? And so hopefully you'll find that refreshing. I do. I like this book a lot. Okay. Any comments or questions so far? All right. So into the introduction, Prabhupada begins by talking about the Vedas, knowledge. So there's this fancy word, epistemology. Epistemology is a word that means it's an aspect of philosophy. That aspect of philosophy where you look at knowledge. How do you know what you know? How do we know we can actually attain knowledge? What are the ways to attain knowledge? Those kinds of questions are answered by the field of epistemology. So before even getting into the Isopanisad, what's said, Prabhupada starts in with epistemology. How do we know what we know? Because he's establishing the authority of the book. In other words, why should I bother reading this book? Would be an appropriate question from an epistemology point of view. Like, what would this book have to offer me? Why does it claim that it has knowledge? How do I even understand that it has? What kind of knowledge could it have? So Prabhupada starts talking about the nature of knowledge and acquiring knowledge. We heard a little bit about this in Bhagavad Gita. For example, we heard in the 13th chapter, you may recall that Krishna himself says that the principles of knowledge begin with amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, kshantir, arjavam. There's a whole list of things, some 20 odd item of, or 15 to 20 items of knowledge, beginning with humility, pridelessness, humility and pridelessness. And so in general, yeah, we could say that if we understand that we don't have knowledge, that's the beginning of knowledge, because then we can ask for knowledge and we can inquire. And there's more on that here. Prabhupada starts talking about our existential condition. So in our conditioned state, we have what's called defects. We have these ways in which we cannot attain perfect knowledge on our own. Just like I said earlier, in the analogy of the spark and the fire, the spark can't stand on its own, right? It can't be its own fire. We can't walk out into the world and see the world under our own illuminating power. The sun has to rise. We're dependent, right? So similarly, as far as gathering knowledge goes, we can try to do that, and we have the capacity to do that, but we can't do it perfectly. And the evidence for that is there's 4 different ways in which we fall short. And these are progressive. So the first is that we have imperfect senses, right? We have imperfect senses. This means, like, for example, I'm looking at my laptop screen. I can't see what's behind my laptop screen with my eyes. My eyes don't have that capacity, right? If you bring me and you bring like a dog into the same room, there are certain frequencies that will make the dog's ears go like this, and I can't hear anything. And maybe there's some frequencies I can hear that the dog can't hear, I don't know. But we have our little ranges, and there are conditions for our senses. If there's not enough light, forget it. I can't see anything. And all the different senses I have a range. They're limited. And really, as time goes on, they're becoming more and more limited. That's just the nature of the human body, of any material body. So the first imperfection is imperfect senses. whatever we want to do to understand the world is through our senses. It begins with our senses, and they're imperfect. The second is that we make mistakes, right? We make mistakes. So based on the knowledge that we gather from our senses, we can reach a conclusion. And those conclusions, even outside of our own limited capacity of our senses, those conclusions that we consciously reach, they're not always correct, right? For example, in one book by Jiva Goswami, he talks about the principle of Anuman, which we'll get to. Anuman means a way of understanding knowledge through reasoning and through the mind, right? He says that according to the principle of Anuman, you use reason, inference, conjecture, logic to understand the world, but it has its limitations. For example, if one sees smoke in the distance, one may infer that there's fire, right? That there's a fire burning there. That's a reasonable inference using an intelligent mind that understands the laws of nature. Fire creates smoke. There is smoke, therefore there must be fire. Is that always correct? Is that always true? No, it may not be. It may be an optical illusion. Your senses may be imperfect, or you may be actually making a mistake. Maybe it's not smoke. Maybe there was a fire. It's not burning anymore. Maybe it's steam. There's different possibilities. So we can have mistakes. So imperfect senses, and we can make mistakes. The third is that there's illusion. We can accept something as real, which is not real. So this is generally on the unconscious level. The mistakes can happen on the conscious level through the attempt at consciously calculating something. We can make a mistake. But there are so many mistakes that are unconscious for us. There are so many categorical errors. There are so many assumptions, presumptions that color our worldview. And there are illusions. We have so many different assumptions about people, about the world. Actually, our experiences of the world are very much formed around our previous experiences. It's very difficult to be unbiased, to not have any kind of ulterior motive or motivation or a clear lens, to be free of these kinds of illusions. In fact, it's so persistent and so deep in the self that one of the best examples of an illusion is the idea that we actually are our body. It's such a fundamental illusion because we live in it literally all day, every day, and all night. And we have to, as long as we're in this world, we have to live in this body. But it's manifestly untrue. There's a difference between the body and the self. The body can change. You can lose parts of the body. You can point to the body, but you can't point to the self. It doesn't exist in the same way. The conscious aspect of the self, the actual self, which experiences, it's not a function of the body, not even of the brain. There's no evidence for consciousness arising from matter, arising in the brain. It's different. And yet the idea that we are our body is very persistent. It's very, very persistent. That's a very simple, but very subtle and very potentially convincing illusion by which most people are illusioned most of the time. And of course, if you think you are your body, that's such a massive error to make in one's calculation of reality, right from square one. So based on that, we can make so many other mistakes. So we can see how illusions also operate, right? And the last one is what's called vipralipsa in Sanskrit. It means the cheating propensity. This one means we actually fudge things. We manipulate reality to make ourselves look better, to make others look worse, for profit, for distinction, for you name the reason. So in academia, you have the responsibility of running, as much as you can, unbiased, replicable experiments. And yet there's a lot of evidence, even just within academia, that there's a certain amount of fudging that goes on because it's difficult for people to be unbiased when their livelihood is at stake, right? You have to publish or perish, as they say. So if you're not publishing, you're perishing. So you have a motivation. You have a motivation to be published. You have a motivation for your research to be considered relevant and important. Therefore, it's very difficult for a human being to operate in a neutral way because we have our own stake. If you have any pride in an argument, you must be subject to the cheating propensity. If you want to look good, you have to be subject to the cheating propensity. If you want to win, if you want to be right, remember we talked about this. The mode of goodness discussion is a discussion where you're trying to find the truth. You're not interested in being right. You can be wrong, and you're fine with that as long as you learn. That's very rare. As long as you have any attachment to looking good or being right, you have to cheat, because that's what we do to try to be right. We don't look at things the way they are. So all these different ways, imperfect senses, mistakes, illusion, and cheating, they make it impossible for us to actually understand reality as it is. Even material reality, what to speak of spiritual reality, which is the object of analysis, study of the Isopanisad. We're not going to measure matter. We're going to study spirit. And so from an epistemology point of view, we have to understand and be convinced, I can't figure out God, spirit, the divine, myself, even consciousness with my own senses. It's not possible to do for these reasons. Not possible to do. However, that doesn't mean it's impossible. If it were impossible, we wouldn't have this class. The nature of Shastra, scripture, is that it's helping the conditioned soul. We need it, actually. We're dependent on it. So, Prabhupada continues, he talks about how the nature of Vedic knowledge is its Shruti, or what's called Shabda. So I mentioned earlier about Anuman, reasoning, mental inference. So generally there are three different categories of ways to understand things. One is what's called Pratyaksha, direct sense perception. Pratyaksha means I see something with my eyes, I hear with my ears, and I understand the world that way. And this is the most immediate. It's the most, it's the simplest. It's also the most prone to mistakes. There are so many things about our senses that are prone to mistakes, and they also have a very tiny range, tiny range of access to reality. So better than that is what's called Anuman, is inference, logic. Like we said, if you see smoke, we can conclude, well, my senses tell me there's smoke, but my intelligence tells me that that could be fire, right? However, honest Anuman also has to include a great deal of doubt. We can't know for sure because, if we have a little bit of experience, we can say, well, there's things that could be other than fire. It may be fire, it may not be. So you have this hypothesizing. And this is what empirical science is based on, is finding the best hypothesis for reality that we can and testing it, coming up with results from those tests, and using that to inform a more educated, more complete view of reality. And that's very good. There's nothing wrong with that. However, that's also insufficient for understanding spirit. It's insufficient for understanding spirit because the very senses that we're using can't approach spirit. When we're talking about the Upanishads, we're talking about the divine, the spiritual. There are things we can't see. It doesn't matter how good your vision is. 2020, 2015, 2010, eagle eyes can't do it. You can't see the soul with your eyeballs. It's not possible. You can't infer the soul. There is no philosopher intelligent enough to prove the existence of God or their own soul through inference alone. You can indicate the possibility. For example, scientists there's two different ideas that, maybe consciousness is from matter, maybe it's not from matter, but they have no way of answering the question through inference, through hypothesis. It's not possible. So higher than these two, of direct perception and inference, is Shabda. You have to hear from authority, right? Just like I've never been to Madagascar, but I take it on authority that there's a place called Madagascar. They put it on the globe. And based on what I understand about Rand McNally and their atlases and globes, you can't just slip a fake country into the globe. You have to have it proven. There have to be enough people go to Madagascar to say it's real. There has to be surveying, cartographers. Maybe they don't get the borders completely right, but there's definitely an island off the east coast of the southern tip of Africa. We call it Madagascar. And that's nothing more than Shabda. That's hearing from authority. Somebody in a position of authority who's been there or has talked to somebody who's been there, has passed on that knowledge. And if I want to understand Madagascar, I have to take it on that authority. Otherwise, I have to buy myself a ticket and go there, which is fine. But we don't really have time for that, for everything. And as far as the spiritual, again, we're not approaching things we can directly experience, at least not right away. At least not right away. Ultimately, we have to have our own experience in spiritual life, and we're cultivating that. But the Shastra, scripture, is presenting a framework that's coming from a higher authority. Just like a parent tells their child, this is how the world works. And the child is naturally, their nature is to trust the parent. The parent has to be truthful, and they have to be forthcoming to share that reality. That's what good parents do. And the child receives that with trust, and they become very, very intelligent very quickly. They learn the world exceedingly quickly. They learn names for things, how things work. It's actually miraculous how quickly they develop. And most of that is from Shabda. Most of that is from hearing from authority, because their range of experience is so small. Similarly, we're like children when it comes to the divine, when it comes to spirit. We can come to the point of more mature understanding and directly experiencing spirit. However, we require to hear from authority in order to get there. We can't figure it out. If somebody tries to figure out spirit on their own, they quickly become paralyzed. It's impossible. You can only make so much progress. Does that make sense? Good. So, thumbs up. So let's pause here for a second. We talked about the 4 defects. Anybody remember what they are?
Before that, could you do me a huge favor? I just got up and I missed the 4th after hearing from authority.
You missed what?
The 4th, direct sense perception, logic, hear from authority.
Yeah, that's a list of 3. That's a list of
Oh.
3. That's complete. The 4 I was referring to
I
was
thought
earlier
that-
when I
sorry.
said, yeah,
Okay,
no
got it.
problem. We listed earlier 4 defects of the conditioned soul.
Imperfect senses.
Imperfect senses. Very good.
Make mistakes from the Bhakti house.
Make mistakes.
Illusion.
Illusion. One more.
Vipra. Cheating.
Cheating. That's right. The cheating propensity. Great. And then these 3 forms of collecting knowledge that Samantha was mentioning. Pratyaksha, direct perception. Anuman, inference. And Shabda, hearing. Hearing. Okay. So Prabhupada gives an example in the introduction. This introduction is based on a talk that he gave in 1969 in England, London, England. He gives the example that the Vedas talk about how the stool of a cow, actually cow dung, is hygienic. It's antibacterial. It's antiseptic, and that's contradictory, right? Because it's stool, and there's no other situation in which a stool of an animal is actually considered anything but impure. If you touch it, you should take a bath. It's not clean. However, modern science has caught up to the fact that, yeah, if you take care of a cow properly, then their dung is actually antiseptic. This is a scientifically established fact as well. This is not anymore just simply Vedic. So there are some aspects of Vedic knowledge that can be verified like that. Because that's an aspect that's talking about something we can measure. However, that only was measured in the 20th century. The Vedas didn't manifest in the 20th century. They were a lot older. So cow dung was used for a variety of reasons. It was used as an antiseptic. It was used in walls and construction, fire, you could burn it, so many different things on the strength of the Vedas, right? And that was an excellent choice because that was correct. So Prabhupada gives us as an example that if we want to understand the Supreme, we have the benefit. Actually, Shastra is a great benefit for us. It helps us. It's there to actually bridge the gap between where we are and the Supreme, which we cannot measure on our own. We cannot approach the divine with our own senses and even our own intelligence and mind, no matter how refined it is. Certainly not in his most intimate feature as a person, right? So he concludes the introduction by citing that as far as Vedanta goes, as I said earlier, there are impersonal interpretations as there are the personalistic bhakti interpretations and presentations. And as far as we're concerned, Vedanta being something composed by Vyasadeva himself, we consider his Srimad Bhagavatam to be his own commentary on his own expounding on the Vedanta. How the Srimad Bhagavatam was composed and why is discussed in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, in Canto 1, Chapter 5 and 6, beginning in 5 to 6, the 5th and 6th chapter, it shows Vyasadev's dissatisfaction. He felt incomplete in his presentation of scripture, including Vedanta. And he talks to his guru Narada, and Narada reveals to him why. You weren't direct enough. You didn't help people come close to understanding the Supreme Person. And we're actually reading from this section in the morning program, Friday mornings. We're reading from this section in our Bhagavatam class there. So just pointing again to this, these Upanishads as being part of Vyasadev's presentation of spiritual truth that culminates in Krishna consciousness, in God consciousness. And so Prabhupada gives us the first word of the, so the Vedanta Sutra includes the Sutra of Janmad Yasya Yataha, which means the Supreme is that from which everything emanates, right? That from which everything emanates. These kinds of general expressions you find in the Vedantas and the Upanishads as well. So from that, we'll go into the invocation. Okay. I'll share the screen. This is a beautiful verse. Because the Upanishads are, could you enable screen sharing? Because the Upanishads are part of the original Vedas, we find that the invocations for them begin with Om. This is an indication of a Vedic mantra. Got it. Okay. Can you all see that? Good. The verse is Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. This is a nice verse to memorize because it's beautiful, it's important, and also it's kind of easy because it's the same word repeated over and over again. Purna. Purna means complete, full. One little hint. I'll give you some linguistics. Purna, complete, in Sanskrit becomes plena in Latin, which is where we get the word plenty and plentiful. Complete and full, plentiful. So Purna, Om Purna. Let me reshare the screen here. The Supreme, the personality of Godhead, is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. He is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. So just like the Vedanta begins, Janmadi Yasya, the Supreme is that from which everything emanates, this Upanishad begins the same way. And it's saying everything emanates from him, and he also remains complete in himself. Just like the analogy that I was sharing earlier, which I got from Prabhupada, that there's a fire, and the sparks emanate from the fire. And those sparks have some of the same qualities of the fire. Fire has heat and light, sparks have heat and light. So similarly, we have consciousness. In fact, we are consciousness, and we have the capacity to know. we can experience, and we can exist in relationship because we come from the Supreme. So that wholeness, that identity of being a whole unit is there in the Supreme, and it's also there in the units that emanate from the Supreme. Purna, they're all complete. So, beautiful purport here. Prabhupada says, he first starts talking about the different ways in which we can understand the Supreme as impersonal Brahman, as the Super Soul, and as Bhagavan. So these are the three aspects of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And only Bhagavan, the Supreme Person, actually manifests all three features. He says, thus the complete whole is not formless. If he were formless, or if he were less than his creation in any other way, he could not be complete. The complete whole must contain everything, both within and beyond our experience. Otherwise, it cannot be complete. Just like a Venn diagram, right? You have the biggest circle. Everything is inside it. So the Supreme Whole, the Om Purnam, the Supreme Complete, has to include everything, including personhood, because so many persons are coming from him. Prabhupada continues, the complete whole, the personality of Godhead, has immense potencies, all of which are as complete as he is. Thus, this phenomenal world is also complete. No other unit in the universe need make an extraneous effort to try to maintain the universe. The universe functions on its own time scale, which is fixed by the energy of the complete whole. And when that schedule is completed, this temporary manifestation will be annihilated by the complete arrangement of the complete whole. So you have the natural unit of the universe. You have the natural unit of solar systems, the natural unit of the planet, the natural unit of the biosphere, the natural unit of the little microenvironments. All these little things, they're coming because of the Supreme Whole. So there is this self-sustaining function, right? In one other place in Prabhupada's purports, Prabhupada gives this very beautiful sentence I'll share. I think he says it somewhere in the Isopanisad too. I don't see it here, but it may come up in another purport. And he says this, all experiences of incompleteness, all manner of incompleteness are due to incomplete understanding of the complete whole. Did you get that? All manner of incompleteness is due to incomplete understanding of the complete whole. So any experience we have of incompleteness, any experience we have of not being full, of lacking. Anybody ever have this? It's not just me, right? Anyone ever feel like you're missing something, or other people are enjoying life but not you, or I wish I had more of this or less of that? Like, this is due to not being completely plugged in. If you're completely plugged in to the complete whole, you don't have this. That's an experience that the completely Krishna conscious, God conscious, saintly persons of any tradition have. We can see that they feel complete. They are satisfied. They're satisfied in themselves. Even in the midst of great dissatisfaction around them, they are personally satisfied. They may not be happy with the suffering of others, because compassion is also a function of the pure soul. But for themselves, they're fully satisfied. They have no other need. They feel connected and complete because they're connected to the Supreme Whole. They don't have the experience of incompleteness. Incompleteness is an artificial experience. It's part of our conditioned experience. It's not who we are. It's not what we're meant for. Because Om Purnam, the Supreme, is complete, and everything that emanates from him is also complete. Good news. Prabhupada gives the example. Because we do not know there is a complete arrangement in nature for our maintenance, we make efforts to utilize the resources of nature to create a so-called complete life of sense enjoyment, right? We may try to artificially adjust our situation to create completeness for ourselves, not understanding that the arrangement has already been made, right? So this is pointing toward the intelligence and wisdom of nature, that the natural arrangement has already allowed for what we need. that natural arrangement coming from the supreme intelligence, the supreme person, who is complete, the supreme complete. He says, the hand of a body is a complete unit only as long as it is attached to the complete body. When the hand is severed from the body, it may appear like a hand, but it actually has none of the potencies of a hand. Similarly, living beings are part and parcel of the complete whole. And if they are severed from the complete whole, the illusory representation of completeness cannot fully satisfy them. Just like a pitcher of water cannot slake your thirst. The function of a limb is to be connected to the supreme whole. That has great utility, but if it's separated, you have to reattach it. Prabhupada completes the purport by saying the completeness of human life can be realized only when one engages in the service of the complete whole. All services in this world, whether social, political, communal, international, or even interplanetary, will remain incomplete until they are dovetailed with the complete whole. When everything is dovetailed with the complete whole, the attached parts and parcels also become complete in themselves. Just like there's a powerhouse, we have to plug into the wall, right? We can't create the electricity. It's our business to be plugged into the wall. And so Krishna consciousness is plugging into that powerhouse. We can't run all the power through our little sockets. We can't run all the power through our little machines. We can't do that, but we can be plugged into the whole and get everything we need, right? So the question is whether we're actually connected to that supreme whole. So this invocation, although it's general, it's not talking about Krishna in his personal feature very directly yet, it's still very relevant for us. Because he's saying that the supreme whole is perfect and complete. And he's a source of all emanations, including ourselves, who are also perfect and complete. And so actually our business is to connect to that person. So we're going to, I think we're going to stop here and take comments, questions, and reflections before we move on. I'll say, for the live and also those listening to the recording later, this week, please reflect back in the WhatsApp group anything you like about the class, anything you like about the discussion, and also specifically with regards to the introduction and the invocation, these 2 points that we have these 4 defects, therefore we can't attain perfect knowledge. And the other point from the invocation of that the supreme is complete and perfect, and everything emanates from that supreme, complete, perfect source. Take from either of these things, and I want you to make that practical for yourself. I want you to ask yourself, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for me, right? That I have imperfect senses. What does it mean for me that I cheat or that other people cheat? What does it mean for me that the supreme whole is complete and perfect? What does it mean for me that I'm connected to that supreme complete? I want you to try to take one aspect, at least, you can take more if you want, from either of these general points of the 4 defects of the conditioned soul, and the Om Purnam, the complete supreme person is a source of all other emanations who are complete themselves, and apply it to your life. And if you want, you can start now in our reflection time. Anything that stood out, also, you can just reflect anything back that stood out. Any questions, any comments? And so read the introduction and invocation this week, by the way, which are pretty short. It's kind of a short book. Now let's take any questions, comments, or reflections.
I would go, Shamya Press.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Well,
You're welcome. What I was thinking, I was making a connection between the invocation and chapter 11 in the Bhagavad Gita, just about the universal form. I happen to be on the universal form right now as I'm going through Chad, and I I appreciated it when we went through in the class before in the winter, and that it's, I feel like Srila Prabhupada is just stating Krishna is, before we go any further, he is everything. He is everywhere. He is complete. And you too can be complete and plentiful and have a nice life if you realize this. But if you don't, it's incomplete. So I just think it sets a nice foundation as we go forward, I'm guessing. That was something I wanted to talk about. And then, sorry, my
Yeah.
dog is whining. He
Let
needs
me
to.
reflect on that first, and then to
Yeah,
go to your
yeah.
next point. Yeah. So for those who don't recall, 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita is a chapter in which Arjuna, he asks to see Krishna's universal form. So Krishna reveals his form as the universe, the source of all different lokas, all the different locations, planets, all the different demigods are dependent on him. They're residing on his own planetary form, universal form. He shows that he's a source of all living entities, that this war that's about to happen with so many people, it's by his will. The sun and moon, celestial objects, and all of their forms are shown to be resting on him. So it's a visual representation. In fact, it's so striking that Krishna says, what you're asking for, you can't see with your eyes. I will give you divine vision. It's not something you can just see. So he grants that. And then we hear the description of it. Lucky us, we get to hear about that universal form. It's, as the hippies would say, quite the trip. It was a very staggering insight about the nature of even just material reality, but even that is quite astonishing. People are going to so much trouble to understand this planet and its position in the solar system, and that position in the galaxy, and the position of the galaxies in the universe, and how that all works in time and space and light and dark matter and this and that. And Christian's like, here it is. And it's staggering, just that, never mind the spiritual world. So it demonstrates that he's, if you can take it back to daycare, when I was a little 5-year-old, he's got the whole world in his hands, right? Is resting on him. I had to sing that little song. Is resting on him. He's showing that it's resting on me. It's dependent on me. Om Purnam. I'm the source of this universe. And Arjuna, very directly, he gets the pratyaksha, the means to see that with his own senses. Normally, you can't just do that. But Krishna writes him a little prescription, gives him these magical glasses, and he can see, oh my goodness, this is actually how it is. And that's a big deal. And you had another point to make too.
No, that I do, but I sort of lost it because I really just wanted to hear more about that. So that was really good. Maybe I'll go again, but thank you for that.
Thank you. Good reflection.
Shamya Pras, I love and appreciate how it's mapped out, how these are 4 ways that all of us in the human experience fall short, right? All of us, like we are all have imperfect senses. We all make mistakes. We are all an illusion. We all have this propensity to cheat, whether it's, to look good or to be right. And that there's nothing, I think in the healing, in each of our healing journey, there's nothing innately wrong with me, right? But experiencing that. And so it's like, oh, this is just like what I'm born into. Like these are the conditions in this world. And now I have this sort of I have like a look at the cheat sheet, if you will, or sort of like, oh, I have insight into this is the way it is and this is the way out. So it's like there's accepting of reality and that we all share, even though it's temporary, and that there's a way out. So I think it can help with feelings of shame or unworthiness or these different things. It's like, no, we all are in this condition.
And also it helps with fear and anxiety, because that's the default. It's not just you, don't adjust your set. This is not on your end. This is the whole across the spectrum. Everybody has this. The default setting is that this is the way the world is, and this is how we are limited. So don't take it personally. And it's just a sober understanding of reality as far as what our capacities are and where they end, what our limitations are. Just like we heard in the Bhagavad Gita that humility is the beginning of knowledge. So similarly, we should become humble when we see, actually I have these defects. But there's a difference between humility sober humility, and shame or anxiety or fear, right? Those are reactions to feeling incomplete, and they're basically like, oh yeah, like I have imperfect senses, or oh yeah, I cheat, or I'm not good enough, and therefore I wish I was good enough. It's still centered on the false self.
Right.
Whereas humility means like, yeah, that's the way things are for everybody. That's really tough. Boy, am I glad that we have the Maha Mantra. Boy, am I glad that we have these scriptures and persons who've lived by them to present them, explain them, exemplify them. That's really wonderful. And so it creates a motivation. Humility creates motivation for inquiry and for application. Whereas the other stuff, shame, fear, anxiety, self-esteem, things, that's just actually a distraction from application and inquiry. It's just, they still focused on, but I wish I could do it all on my own. It's like, but you don't have to. It's not about you doing it all on your own. So don't try to make yourself, the totality and have to figure it out on your own. That's not going to work.
Right.
I have a follow-up question on that.
Yes.
And would you say, Shamya, that on the flip side, that fragmented, defective self we experience, that we are also complete and whole in and of ourselves?
We have to be.
It's
The,
just
the invocation just
maybe
said
a
so.
misunderstanding. Yeah. So is it just one big giant misunderstanding?
Yes. All manners of incompleteness are due to incomplete understanding of the complete whole.
That'd be a great
So
name for a
if
book.
I'm identifying myself as my body, if I'm identifying myself as my mind, if I'm identifying myself with my limitations culturally, physically, situationally, contextually, my family, my this, my that, my mood swings, my unplucked eyebrows, you name it. It's like, it doesn't matter. Those are all just misunderstandings. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's what the verse is helping us to see. So this is the kind of stuff I want you to really think about and apply in the WhatsApp group, because this is where the juice really is. Because that has big time implications, and everyone's going to have a very unique and very powerful contribution to make about these kinds of things when we think about what this means for us.
Right.
Thank you.
The other thing I was going to mention is I remember hearing like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna uses the word me or come to me, so many times.
Right.
And even in one verse, he says it 6 times. He says me 6 times in the verse. And that traditionally informing Sanskrit verses or like, poetry, if you will, right? It's like, it's considered, it's like a faux pas. There isn't repetition. And so
Right.
that's why it's so intentional that there's repetition. And then same in this verse with Purnam, like saying complete so many times. It's like really making that, would that be a similar situation where it's trying to make that point again?
Yeah, nothing's arbitrary. So the repetition is striking.
Yeah.
Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Complete, 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 complete. Of course, it's also not just like nonsense, because they all serve a purpose in the translation, you can see. But yeah, it's noticeable.
Yeah.
I'll read the translation to the verse again. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance.
Karnamrita has a beautiful version of singing this. We're singing I think maybe the whole Sri Isopanisad, but at least the first verse.
Yeah, she sings like about half the verses.
Okay.
You can look that up. In fact, maybe you can put that into the WhatsApp chat for those who want to. I
I'll do
also
that.
found something very cool, which is an audio recitation of the Isopanisad by Amalabhakta Swami. is a nice devotee based in LA, elderly disciple of Srila Prabhupada. I've met him, he's a really sweet devotee. And he loves to read Prabhupada's books. And he has some recordings, and let me see if I can just put this in the chat. This is a link to yeah, that should work. This is a link to the invocation and the introduction, and he actually just reads the whole thing, including the purports, I believe, including the purports. So check that out if you want to listen to purports on your drive, or you like to learn through your ears, you just want to like hear it. He even puts a little music in between the different mantras, so I think that's pretty cool. Check it out if you like.
I put it in the WhatsApp group too, the link that you just sent.
Great. All right, let's get more reflections or comments or questions. So
Mel,
Tanya,
I'll reflect. I'm sorry.
go ahead,
Okay.
Tanya. Oh, Tanya,
Okay,
we'll come back
thank
to
you.
Mel.
Okay. I just think it's really interesting, you know, given that we've heard about, you know, the 4 defects with our you know, imperfect senses. We make mistakes, we have illusion, we have propensity to cheat. But then the way to understand is to use our sense perception. But wait a minute, we just said that we have, you know, problems with that, right? And then we're going to draw inferences, but wait a minute, we said we have problems with that. And then what I'm getting at is, you know, hearing from authority, it becomes very, very clear very quickly that we need to choose the proper authorities to hear from.
Yeah, we really do. Yeah. So, yeah, because that puts a ceiling otherwise on how much we can learn and how correct the information can be, right? Like in the example I gave at the beginning, like a child learns from authority. If the parent doesn't know, or the parent is deceptive, then the child has a big problem because they're dependent. They're completely dependent, right? So in the Vedanta Sutra, I've mentioned this before. In the Vedanta Sutra, Vyasadeva talks about this. He says, you know, somebody may object that, how do I know that I can actually apply what the scripture is saying? And he says the evidence is that the scripture actually exists, because it wouldn't be asking you to do something you couldn't do, right? In other words, as axiomatic truth, axiomatic means something that you have to accept to even begin the process. For example, in mathematics, you have to accept there's such a thing as a number 1, right? And based on that, you can start doing different things with numbers and adding and subtracting, and the whole thing really develops, right? But you have to have an axiomatic truth, right? One of the axiomatic truths is that there is a compassionate source that wants good for us. And based on that, we can progress. That actually justifies the existence of the scripture, right? The scripture is not just something created by people to control other people. It's not nonsense. It's not non-existent. It's actually coming from a divine source that wants good for us. That's axiomatic. Of course, you can prove that to yourself by applying it in your life, but you can't prove it until you actually accept it axiomatically first. Just like you can't do anything with numbers until you accept that even a number exists in abstraction. So yeah, we do have to hear from the right authority. And there's a lot you could say about that. You know, there's even like, you know, empirical or scientific research about this, that like scientists have found old manuscripts from 1500, 2000 plus years ago on Bhagavad Gita and other texts. And so they know what the text looked like 2000 plus years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or 2500 years ago. And they also know that in those times, in the times since then, the text has not been passed down by writing. The text has been passed down by hearing. And it's been passed down by training young persons from the age of 5 collectively to control their senses, live a mode of goodness lifestyle, to minimize imperfect senses, to minimize mistakes, minimize illusion, minimize cheating, and maximize hearing from authority together for long stretches of time, for decades. And then they teach the next generation for 2,500 years. And what they found is that the level of accuracy that created was greater than the level of accuracy even of somebody writing and transcribing by hand from a manuscript. Just writing creates more mistakes than hearing perfectly in a spiritual community. So just to give a little bit of context, that spiritual transmission of knowledge is a possible thing. Transmission of spiritual knowledge. And this culture of spiritual knowledge is what we're inheriting. Just the Prabhupada gives the example, like if there's a large tree and there's some wonderful fruit at the top of the tree, you can't just drop the fruit because it'll crash and make a big mess. You have to have it handed down. So somebody's at the top of the tree, they pick the ripest fruit, hand it down to someone right below them, who picks it up by the hand, gives it to somebody below them. Like this little relay race all the way down to ground level. And here we are, not knowing anything. Put your hand up and you receive it. That's parampara. Teacher to student to teacher to student, all the way down. And if you receive it properly, there you have it. They have the exact same thing that they had at the top of the tree. And this is possible to have. We have to choose that spiritual authority that is actually living the mode of goodness lifestyle, that is living according to the scripture itself, that knows it and has applied it very completely. We talked a bit about this in the Nectar of Instruction, qualifications of Guru. Yeah. Thank you. Good reflection.
Mel has a reflection.
Thank you. Go ahead.
As soon as you read in the verse that, or in the invocation, that whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete by itself. Like I wrote that down like immediately because it was like a snap of like an aha moment for me. You like think about your spark of the splendor, you think about your drop, and you don't really think about like how you're actually complete, right? You don't actually think about that. And so much of all of these formless comings, they like really teach us the opposite of that. And you spend so much of your life like just in this space of feeling completely incomplete all the time. And so then you had said at the beginning, you said, if we don't have knowledge, we can ask for knowledge. And the whole idea of like thinking that you're incomplete is that you have such a lack of knowledge. And so it all is just brings it back to like humility of just asking, of just inquiring, of just learning, and really like being super open to realizing our incomplete nature, to that in fact we are complete. It's so fascinating and it's so beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, otherwise there's so much time and energy wasted trying to create an experience of completeness artificially, right? So many ways. You can also reflect on this in the WhatsApp if you want. I can think of so many ways in which that plays out in society. Just not understanding this very beginning versus invocation and not applying it in our lives. So, if I have that physical possession, if I have that sensual experience, if I have this, then I'll be complete, right? But we don't depend on that. That's not the arena of our completeness. It's not that that would be true if we were the body, but we're not the body. The body can never be complete. It's got a little lifespan. It's got a little beginning and ending. It's not eternal.
Right. It's like what we just read today is the reason why we try to fill the God-shaped hole with anything other than God.
Right.
With food, relationships, drugs, alcohol, shopping,
And why it
travel.
won't work.
This is why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Any other reflections, comments, or questions? It's a good start, auspicious beginning. Okay, so yeah, again in the WhatsApp, reflect on anything you like, and also take something from either the 4 defects of the conditioned soul or the Om Purnam principle, the principle that the source is the complete whole from which everything complete emanates, and apply it. What does it mean to you? How does that change things for you? And please read the introduction and invocation. And next week, we'll read verse 1 and maybe verse 2. If you want to read ahead, you can. If you're feeling eager for more spiritual knowledge, it's really good stuff. Yeah. Jai. Isopanisad class number 1, Ki Jai. Okay. Sri Isopanisad, Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Bhakti Sangha, and beyond, Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shamya Pras. Thank you
welcome.
so much. We miss you in physical form here.
See you soon.
Yeah. I also just wanted to say that today we don't have Amy's not here, and she's someone who's at every single class and usually sitting here.
Mm.
But her mom just had surgery today and she's doing well, but Amy is like taking care of her for the next few weeks, so she won't really be around in Sangha for a little while. And Amy, if you're listening to this, you're so embarrassed. But I just wanted to name that so that we can be sending love and prayers and support to Amy and reach out to her and remain connected. And because this is a lifeline for her and she's, sacrificing it in order to serve.
Amen. We're connected through sound.
That's right.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol. Good night,
Krishna,
everybody.
Thank
Night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Krishna.
Thank you. Good night.
Mm.